So one thing a lot of us are looking for today is prices to start going down on something. We want to have deflation. And in case you guys are wondering who my bodyguard is over here, this is my dad, James. But he's not going to talk to you today, but he will talk to you in a future video, because we're going to talk in the future about some problems that are going on here in the local economy with Illinois. But for now, let's keep it on the car market, because deflation is happening in real time in the car market right now, because it's finally getting easier to buy a brand new car. You know, we had this situation during the pandemic where people just could not get into buying a new car. Even if you wanted to, they just didn't have them available. There were chip shortages that made it so it was really hard to get into a new car. And now that that's all over with, we have the opposite problem. You're starting to see these dealers sit on a tremendous amount of inventory. You even have companies like Stellantis begging, or the dealers that sell Stellantis cars, begging the Stellantis in order to lower the prices. Because like I talked to my buddy Brandon the other day from Car Questions Answered, they're not allowed to sell those cars below their invoice prices, you know, at least not on advertisement. So they can't advertise lower than invoice prices. So the only way to get a good deal on these brand new cars is to go into individual dealerships and see what kind of a deal they'll give you. But even then, with the price of these brand new cars combined with these high interest rates, it's basically impossible for a lot of people to buy them, unfortunately. And it's creating a big problem for the auto industry. And, you know, all of us want to see lower prices on things right now, but particularly when it comes to cars, that's where we're seeing it, but it's still not enough to get people out there. And I think what we're seeing in the car market is going to end up being a preview for what we're going to see in the real estate market eventually. So right now, according to Cox Automotive, the average price for a brand new car is $48,389 as of May 2024, and that's down from its peak at the end of 2022. But here's the other problem. It's not just the price. You know, you're already looking at basically 50 grand for a brand new car, but interest rates for a brand new car right now will run you anywhere between 6.7 to 12% interest rates for an auto loan, guys. So this is basically the kiss of death for your finances right now, is getting into an auto loan like this that you can't afford. You know, a few months ago, I talked about people that are spending $1,500, $1,600, $1,700 a month on their car payments, and it's basically bankrupting them. They're turning around and saying, wait a minute, this isn't working and we have to sell these cars. Here's something funny, you know, this is how out of touch with reality that economists are, because an economist with Cox Automotive is telling potential car buyers, well, maybe you should try to wait out the interest rate situation if you're somebody that wants to get into a new car right now, because the interest rates are going to come down. Well, so far, we have seen no indicator that the interest rates are going to come down. You know, we just had the most recent Fed meeting. There was no rate cut. There's most likely going to be no rate cut at the next Fed meeting. And they're saying at best case scenario right now, there might be one this year. And if they cut rates by a quarter point, who is going to be able to afford a brand new car still? Just the same thing with buying a house, guys. How does it make it affordable? It doesn't. So, you know, this advice of, well, let's just wait out the interest rate situation and see what happens isn't going to work. So basically what you're seeing right now in the car market is a deflationary spiral where the prices are being forced to come down in order to offload these cars because the interest rates are not moving. And that's why I think eventually you're going to see the same thing with real estate. But the difference is they can produce these cars a lot faster and the inventory piles up a lot quicker than when we're talking about building homes and having existing homes come to the market. And it's why you're not seeing this level of distress in the housing market just yet. But the other thing that this is doing is it's actually putting people in the position that, well, even if I can afford a brand new car, I think I'll just wait. You know, I think I'll wait until interest rates come down or they start selling them a little bit cheaper. And it makes the problems even worse with the auto industry, because once people realize that they kind of have nowhere to go and they know that they're going to have to start lowering the prices of these cars to get them sold, then it puts them in the position where, you know, they're not selling these cars, and these dealerships are going to end up going out of business unless they start offering some tremendous deals to people right now. So really, over the last 2 years, we have seen the prices of brand new and used cars coming down because there's nowhere else for it to go. Like, it already went to the highest level it could be during the pandemic when there's a shortage, and now we have the opposite problem. And so cars are considered durable goods, and durable goods right now are in a recession. When we're talking about home appliances, cars, furniture, sports equipment, even toys, these things are just sitting on the shelves. People aren't buying these items anymore. Some people claim it's because everybody bought all this stuff during the pandemic and they don't need it anymore, but it's also because all this stuff is expensive. And so you're starting to see the prices of these cars come down because Cox Automotive, they track a lot of data when it comes to the car market, and they say that vehicle prices fell about 1% just in May of 2024 alone, and that about 41.2% of vehicles sold in May transacted for less than $40,000. So that's a pretty big discount when you're talking about the average price being $48,000 for a brand new car, and people are already getting it for almost $10,000 less. So people are already starting to get deals on these brand new cars. So it's actually a pretty good time to go out and start looking for a brand new car if you can afford one. Of course, if you're going to go into massive debt and have a $1,500 a month payment, probably not the smartest thing to do. But if you can afford to pay cash for one, or pay at least half of it up front and have a lower payment, this could be a good opportunity right now. Guys, while we are on the topic of cars, there's been a lot of bad press lately with how even your car is selling your personal data to insurance companies in order to jack up your rates. Like, you literally can't trust anybody with your data anymore. And that's why I have partnered with Delete Me. Delete Me is a subscription service that will remove your personal information that's being sold online, because you have a ton of data brokers that will just aggregate all of your information and sell it to the highest bidder, whoever wants your email address or your mother's maiden name or your home address or your phone number. Whatever data people can collect on you, these data brokers will sell. And Delete Me helps erase all that information from these websites on your behalf. And so this will help you regain some of your privacy in a world where everybody is just trying to take it from you and steal all of your data. I decided to sign up for Delete Me myself because after doing a few internet searches on myself, I realized how much of my own personal information is out there, and I'm not happy about it. But since I've signed up with Delete Me, they have literally removed my info from hundreds of different data broker websites, and the amount of spam calls and spam emails I have gotten has drastically been reduced since then. So make sure to get 20% off your Delete Me subscription today by joining using the link down in the description below at joindeleteme.com/boardandarrow. But particularly the EV market is getting hit hard with this. We've talked about the problems with the EV sales over the past year or so, and things aren't really getting any better with them. And especially the used EV car prices right now are basically crashing. Nobody wants to buy a used one for the most part, because a lot of times the repair costs are just monumental and can actually be more than the car itself. In fact, in February of this year, the used electric vehicle prices dipped below the prices of used gasoline powered prices for the first time ever. Okay, so think about that. Think about how weak the demand for EV cars is, that they're getting so cheap where you can buy a used one cheaper than a gas-powered car, and people still aren't buying them, right? Here's the other thing that's changing is people's perception of EVs, because for a long time, EVs were kind of untouchable for many people because they were so expensive. And now that you can buy a used one cheaper than a gas-powered car, they're kind of losing that luxury status. And consumers are looking at these cars as less favorable than before in terms of like, well, this probably isn't as luxurious as everybody thought it was, huh? As of June in 2023, average used EV prices were over 25% higher than used gas car prices. But by May, used EVs were on average 8% lower than the average price for a used gasoline-powered car. So in just 1 year, that's how much the used EV prices have come down, from 25% more expensive to 8% less expensive than a gas-powered car. I can't think of another situation where you've seen something drop in price so dramatically right now in this economy, guys. Like, inflation is a big issue that we constantly keep talking about, how expensive everything is, and a lot of us want to see deflation, and we are seeing it massively right now in the car market, especially if you want to buy a used EV. But once again, you got to be willing to take on that risk of buying that used car for maybe 20 grand, 15 grand, and oh, it needs a new battery. Well, that's going to be an additional 13 or 15 grand, you know? So that's a big risk to take on, and you don't really know how much life is left in them because it's kind of unpredictable. Nobody really knows. Right at this moment, used EV prices are on average about $2,650 cheaper than a used gas car. Even over the past year, the price of a used gasoline car has gone down by 3 to 7%, while electric vehicle prices have decreased between 30 and 39%, guys. You know, a lot of people have asked me, what am I going to consider a housing crash? And I would say if the prices go down by about 20% within a 2-year time frame, that's kind of my definition of a housing crash. But we're talking about car prices going down between 30 and 40% in just 1 year. I mean, this is a major crash in prices of these cars. And it just goes to show you how the demand for these cars is nil. Nobody wants them. And now that people are becoming aware that these cars are not really worth what they were asking for anywhere near that when they were brand new, if people are going to get into buying them, guess what? They're going to lowball the hell out of you, and they're going to want a deal. They're not going to want to pay a premium because there's so many of them for sale, so you can't ask a premium, number one. And obviously, these brands have lost their luxurious appeal. And I don't even understand why anybody would be spending big bucks right now buying a brand new one if you can buy a used one for so cheap. Yeah, maybe you might have some problems you might have to fix, but even then, it would still be cheaper than buying one of the brand new ones right now. And the other problem is it's kind of the perfect storm, just like housing, but in the opposite direction with inventory right now, in that so many people have adopted EVs over the past few years, and now that those cars are, 3, 4, 5 years old, you have a lot of people who want to sell them all at the same time in order to upgrade to the latest model, and that creates a massive amount of inventory, which brings the prices down the 30 to 40% we're talking about here. Right now, if you buy a brand new EV and you want to sell it a year later, you're literally looking at a 20% price reduction just in the first year. Doesn't matter how many miles are on it, how much you drove it. Nobody cares if it just sat in the garage and you didn't do anything with it. You're still looking at a 20% price cut because that's how much these things are losing value right now. So this is actually good news. People always say I'm Mr. Bad News, but guess what? If you're looking to buy an electric car, especially if you don't have a lot of money, this can be an opportunity for you. Just realize, the potential problems you could be facing with the range anxiety and maybe not having a place to charge it. That's the number one reason people get rid of these cars also and go back to gas-powered cars, because they don't want to waste time looking for a charger and getting to one and finding out that they can't charge it because the charger's broken, and different issues with that. The infrastructure for charging just really isn't there yet. So really, people that can charge it in their driveway are the best candidates for having one right now. But if you need to charge it in the wild, it's probably not a good idea. But you can get a deal on these cars right now. And here's something interesting that I find about this. Like, a lot of people say, well, eventually when we get these cheaper electric vehicles, then that's when people are going to start switching to them over gas-powered cars. However, they're already cheaper than gas-powered cars, at least when you're buying a used one, and yet the demand is still low and they're not selling. Look at Hertz. They're selling Teslas right now for 20 grand, guys. Like, you're buying basically a beater in a lot of cases for 20 grand now. It's really hard to find a nice used car, for 20 grand or less. I'm not saying you can't, but that's how far these things have come down. Whereas when they were selling these cars brand new for $45,000, $50,000, $60,000. And they say that between 30 to 50% of the value of an electric car comes down to one thing. It's battery power and how much power is left in the battery, which is kind of something that's hard to know, especially when you have electric cars that won't let you charge past a certain amount, or they won't let you drain the battery past a certain amount. So even if you get promised a certain amount of range or battery capacity, you might not actually be getting it And so even if the car is telling you how much life of the battery is left, that might not be very accurate when it comes to the real world circumstances in driving.
What people don't understand that don't know anything about electric cars is they always give you some ridiculous charging time to charge them. But that's always from 20% to 80%. So right there, you've lost 40% range of the vehicle because you're not going below 20%. So that's 20% you lost. And you're only charging it to 80% because past that, it takes way too long to charge them. So that's another 20%. So you're only working with 60% to begin with. And then in the real world, you lose some of that. So it's less than 50% of what you think you're going to get on the thing. The way those charges work is they can supercharge relatively quickly from 20 to 80%. But going from 80 to 100, you're going to be sitting there over an hour. Now, most people aren't going to do that. So instead, you got to keep stopping and charging it up when it gets below 20%, and then charge it up to 80%, and when it goes down, it's just stupid. It would be like owning a gasoline car that had a 20-gallon tank, but you could only use like 12 gallons of the fuel, and the rest was just sitting there unusable. And then sometimes guys will test and say, we got our Tesla to go 320 miles. We started it up full and we drove it until it stopped. Well, great. But then when it stops, you're stuck where you are, right? Who wants to be stuck in the middle of nowhere with no electricity, right? So you got to stop all the time. And if you do want to charge it to 100%, you're going to be sitting there 45 minutes or an hour.
Now, the demand for these electric cars is so bad right now that even the automakers are starting to scale back their efforts on producing them, because a lot of companies have had a real hard time selling their electric vehicles, except for Tesla. Really, Tesla is the only brand here in the US that stands out as a winner, and they've been undercutting everybody. You know, they have already lowered the price of their cars, you know, several times over the past couple of years, and it's to the point where the other automakers can't really compete. General Motors, they recently cut their expected EV sales and productions from 200 to 300,000 down to 200 to 250,000. And EVs right now make up less than 3% of GM's first quarter sales. So that just goes to show you that people are buying 97% of the gas-powered cars are what's being sold from General Motors versus just 3% of their EVs, guys. I've seen a few of those electric Hummers driving around in Miami, but it's like, these guys are insane. They're buying these big electric Hummers for 100 grand. I mean, who's doing this right now? And it's just so stupid. You know, how much is that thing going to be worth next year? Probably less than 80 grand and even less than that the year after. And Ford, they're even scaling back their efforts even more, because they have now made a decision to rescind a program that was announced during the initial EV boom that required Ford dealers to make significant investments in EV infrastructure in order to be able to sell electric vehicles. So they're saying, yeah, we're not going to do that anymore. And according to this article, there are over 64,000 publicly accessible electric vehicle charging stations in the United States, which boils down to 176,000 individual charging ports. Well, that's not very many, if you ask me. That's like pales in the comparison to how many gas stations and how many pumps each gas station has, and doesn't even factor in how much time you're going to be sitting there wasting charging your electric car. Because there's about 145,000 gas stations in the US, which is more than double the amount of charging stations. And then you got to think every gas station has how many pumps, you know, probably at least 12, maybe more. Those big gas stations, like big truck stops, they have 40 pumps, you know. So there's just so much more infrastructure there for people to gas up, and it's just more readily available. It takes way less time, and a lot of people would say it's still cheaper. I think it's cheaper. According to the Department of Energy, you have about 60% of Americans now who live within 2 miles of a public charger, but only 7% of people who live within 2 miles of a charger will consider buying an EV. So you can just see that even if people have access to the infrastructure, that they still don't really want the car. And I don't know what's going to change that. You know, Brandon, the other day when I talked to him and saw him, he thinks that it comes down to an education/marketing problem for the electric cars, that they need to do a better job educating their potential customers on, you know, the benefits of having an EV car and all of this. But I think enough people have already heard, you know, the horror stories with them that they just don't want them. I'm one of those people But it's not just the horror stories, it's also just the fact that it's not practical. I can't buy a big Jeep like I have now and get, 500 miles off of one tank or one charge of the car. It's just not possible. And as somebody like me that likes to do these big long road trips, it's not a practical solution. But if you're driving 5 miles to work every day and back home, then maybe it is. According to a recent Gallup poll of Americans, they say that the ownership of EVs is increasing by 3% equally, but it's also equally decreasing by 3% in the amount of customers who are showing interest in buying one. So you have demand going up just as much as it's going down, if that makes any sense. And as it sits today, you have about 35% of Americans saying they may consider buying an EV in the future, which is down from the 43% who said they might last year. So as the technology improves and as more of these cars become available for sale, you actually have less people interested in buying one, which is kind of like the worst combination you can get for the electric car market. But hey, at least we're seeing deflation somewhere, because we know we're not seeing it much with rent or gas prices or the cost of buying a house or food or anything else that we need. Now here's something else that I've heard many different people predict that would happen after this whole pandemic boom, because you saw a lot of people buy a bunch of cars they couldn't afford, but they also bought a lot of other toys like boats and RVs and ATVs and things like that. Well, guess what? That's another thing that's in a deflationary spiral right now, because now that reality's setting in and inflation is taking its full toll on everyone's finances, people are starting to offload these toys because they can't afford them anymore. It was kind of like the perfect storm for everything, guys. Like during the pandemic, people were getting a lot of free money. There was all this push to have social distancing and get away from people. So a lot of people wanted to buy like an RV or a camper and things like that to kind of isolate and get away from people. And they had the extra money to buy it because the government was handing out checks like it was candy at Halloween, right? So, but now that all that's over and people are faced with the reality of the increasing insurance bill, the increasing cost of gas, the increasing cost of maintenance to maintain these vehicles, and the higher cost of living in general, they're now being forced to unload their toys, because now you have the opposite perfect storm hitting, where the cost of living is increasing. You have remote work becoming more scarce. A lot more companies are calling people back to the office, and people don't have the money to buy this stuff anymore. So when you want to go sell it, it's much harder to offload it to someone else. Now you have overflowing dealer lots for boats and RVs too, because nobody can afford this stuff. I mean, when are they going to get the hint that, nobody can pay 50 grand for a new boat? Nobody can pay $80,000 for a new RV going across the country. I mean, this is big money. This used to be the cost of a house in some parts of America. Some places you still can buy a house for that price. You can just take a look at a company like Brunswick. They are the world's largest maker of pleasure boats, all right? And their first quarter sales this year in 2024 dropped 22% from where it was just a year ago in 2023. And they're expecting their operating income to go down by as much as 53%. So imagine being a business right now that is literally trying to operate on half of the money that you were bringing in just a year ago, just 1 year ago. That is a tremendous decrease. They're saying that their revenue levels are going to go back to where they were in 2012 to 2013. I mean, that was right after we were just finally starting to recover from the GFC, and probably when things started to get okay for a company like this again. And to see their sales numbers and their revenue numbers go down to this is bad for a couple reasons. Number one, it shows you the demand isn't there for these boats, but also it's because of inflation. All right, it doesn't say what their sales figures exactly were, but say it's $50 million. $50 million today is worth a lot less than it was back in 2012 and 2013. So when adjusted for inflation, these numbers are actually even worse than they're being reported. So now they're trying to do things that still allow them to bring in money, like sell the motors for boats. They also bought this company called the Freedom Boat Club, which allows people who don't want to own a boat or deal with the maintenance and storage to use one regularly for a membership fee. So they're trying to come up with creative ways to keep the business going, just like every other business is right now. But once again, if everything was going great with the economy, they wouldn't have to do this, right? They would just be selling boats. They wouldn't have to think of creative ways to bring in extra money, and everything would be fine. But clearly, that's not the case. You even have the National Marine Manufacturers Association forecasting that boat sales in the US are projected to go down to 22% below their peak where they were in 2021. So clearly the party's over for all of these businesses. And this is also why you're seeing so many layoffs so far in 2024 and a lot of businesses closing their doors, because the sales numbers have dropped off so much that they just can't make it work anymore. And right now they say the amount of used RVs listed for sale on RVtrader.com is now more than twice as high as it was during the period of peak demand. So it's just the same thing that's happening with the electric cars and really all used cars, brand new cars, RVs, toys, boats, everything, guys. Anything that people don't really need right now are the things that are just sitting out there and not being sold. And I think that also just goes to show you another reason why housing kind of fares better than those things do, because everybody needs a place to live, right? People don't need to buy a brand new car. They don't need to buy a boat or an RV, but a lot of people need a house. Everyone needs that. And so people are going to put all of their money into something like that before going out there and buying one of these things. But one way that these companies can actually recover some money that they're losing right now is by taking advantage of people that want to get rid of their toys. People that bought all these things brand new for high prices. Now these dealers can say, yeah, we'll buy it back from you for half or 40% of what we sold it to you for 3 years ago, because that's all it's worth, and we need to make a profit when we turn around and sell it. So there is actually light at the end of the tunnel for these businesses, but not so much for the people who thought it was a good idea to go out and splurge on these things during the pandemic. So just yet another sign that things are not nearly as good as we're being told right now. You know, if everybody wanted to go out there and have fun and had the money to do it, they would be doing it right now, guys. But they're looking to get rid of these toys in order to save money right now because the cost of living is so high. And I think we all know what that means. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here. And I'll see you in the next one.